Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Step for Youth podcast, a City of Houston initiative for youth and by youth. As part of becoming a child-friendly city, Houston Youth, through the Mayor's Office of Education and Youth Engagement, developed this podcast to create a space for youth to share their experiences and thoughts on the state of children's rights in their city. We aim to promote the rights of Houstonians and children everywhere by talking to experts who protect children's rights, highlighting the importance of youth voices, empowering youth to advocate for themselves as well as their community, and inviting youth to join and support organizations that prioritize their rights, such as the Child Friendly Cities Initiative, or short, CFCI.
And when we talk about children's rights, we're talking about the articles listed in the United Nations Convention of the Rights of a Child. For example, the convention states that every child has the right to a standard of living that permits them to develop physically, cognitively, spiritually, morally, and socially. The City of Houston continues to ensure that this responsibility is met and supports youth to be an active, essential part of our society. On November 19, 2019, Houston's Mayor Sylvester Turner became the first U.S. mayor to sign UNICEF's Global Child-Friendly Cities Manifesto. And in August 2020, Houston became the first city in the U.S. to be nominated as a candidate for UNICEF's official recognition as a child-friendly city. Oftentimes, child and youth voices are not heard on some of the most significant issues impacting their communities. Join us today to learn and hear about how Houston and its youth leaders can achieve safe and compassionate communities for all young people.
Hello everyone, we are your hosts. My name is Min and I am an 11th grader from Aldine ISD.
And I'm Angel, an 11th grader from Houston ISD.
We are a part of the Child Friendly Cities Initiative Youth Participation Committee, which aims to create awareness and advocate for children's rights. This committee is situated inside the City of Houston's Mayor's Office of Education and Youth Engagement.
In today's podcast episode, we'll be focusing on a child's right to safety and inclusion based on the following articles from the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. Article 19 from the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, which states governments must do all they can to ensure that children are protected from all forms of violence, abuse, neglect, and bad treatment by their parents or anyone else who looks after them. And Article 34, which states governments must protect children from sexual abuse and exploitation. We will be talking to Dwayne Bennett from Cherish Our Children and Taylor Johnson from United Against Human Trafficking. Together, they will help us better understand how to create safe environments for children and youth. They will also talk about how to prevent human trafficking and how to support youth with incarcerated parents, as well as share recommendations for policy changes to ensure safe and healthy development of youth. During this episode, we will be discussing some difficult and sensitive topics, like human trafficking, so viewer discretion is advised.
Thank you, Angel. The right of a child to safety and inclusion calls for every child to be valued, respected, and treated equally within their communities and schools, as well as by local governments, parents, and their peers. We are honored to welcome today's guests, Dwayne Bennett and Taylor Johnson, who protect and advocate for children's rights to safety and inclusion every day. Dwayne is the Executive Director for Cherish Our Children, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to create solutions for vulnerable children in Houston, especially children of incarcerated parents. Dwayne has more than 25 years of experience in the nonprofit and governmental sectors. Before joining Cherish Our Children, Dwayne was the Co-Executive and Development Director for Justice for All Immigrants. His community impact doesn't stop there. He has worked for the Harris County Child Protective Services, the Texas Defender Services, and the Boys and Girls Club of Victoria, Texas, as well. His passion is to help youth realize and achieve their full potential. Thank you, Dwayne, for your dedication to caring for children, and welcome to another Step for Youth podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Our second guest is Taylor Johnson, who is the Prevention and Outreach Coordinator at United Against Human Trafficking. Taylor has been in the fight against human trafficking for over 4 years. Taylor approaches identifying human trafficking situations and preventing exploitation by inviting and empowering those he serves to explore new ways of thinking and being. Taylor is deeply committed to fighting against trafficking and uses his expertise to encourage men and boys to create a better world, a world without exploitation and gender-based violence. Taylor is in love with philosophy, can talk about music for hours, and you can count on him for terrible dad jokes. Happy you could join us, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I promise I won't use too many dad jokes today.
Taylor, the first question is for you. Tell us more about the work you do at United Against Human Trafficking, and why is it important for youth to be informed about human trafficking?
Yeah, so I'm the Outreach and Prevention Coordinator. I've been there, we said, over 4 years now. My role for the first 3 and some change was primarily working with youth. So I would go to schools, juvenile detention centers, foster placements, places where there were youth that were experiencing homelessness, and training them about, here's what human trafficking is, here's what healthy relationships kind of look like, here's what an action plan and a safety plan might look like, here's how you can identify people that you can trust and who maybe you shouldn't trust or can't trust. What I've been doing since then is running our sort of demand reduction programs. One in particular is called Stopping Sexual Exploitation, which is a pretrial intervention program for men who are charged with solicitation of prostitution, so men who buy sex. We want to try to change their attitudes and behaviors around that.
Why is it important for youth to be informed about human trafficking?
Yeah, traffickers will target people that are vulnerable. Not saying that young people by default are vulnerable, but young people experience a lot of vulnerabilities, and they don't always have a lot of the experience to kind of become resilient to a lot of those things that they might deal with, such as homelessness, having a family member, especially like a parent who's incarcerated, experiencing abuse at home, just not having support at all. Those are things that traffickers actively look for, and there are a lot of young people that experience those very things. But in Houston especially, we know that is happening all the time. Houston is the city with the most human trafficking cases in the nation. So, in my time at UAHT, I've identified way too many young people that were at the time experiencing trafficking or who at the time had previously experienced trafficking. So we're not done. We have more to do in the fight. So,
since you speak to youth about a topic that can be difficult to talk about, how do you think we should approach this topic, which can be sensitive to many youth?
In the beginning of the episode, y'all kind of give a little warning, like, hey, we're going to talk about something that might be kind of uncomfortable. So that's one thing, is you always just kind of speak to your audience and let them know, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about. If that's not chill for you, then totally understandable. It makes a lot of sense. But beyond that point, I think that it's really easy to just be real with anybody that we talk to. There's a certain age that we really try to focus on. So, for example, if someone's younger than middle school, maybe we shouldn't be talking about human trafficking with that population. Maybe we can talk about things like consent and trust and boundaries, right? We can talk about those things, but as far as human trafficking goes, okay, we're going to wait until they're a little bit older so they can kind of grasp some of these concepts a little easier. So I think once you kind of get into that age where we can kind of understand that there are things like sex, abuse, pornography, those things are a part of the everyday conversation for a lot of young people. So there's no issue with just being real and saying, hey, this is what we're talking about. Human trafficking is either commercial sexual exploitation or forced labor. Those concepts are pretty easy for young people to grasp. A lot of young people will come to one of our trainings, and then they'll disclose something that's maybe not human trafficking, but maybe abuse at home, or something that's going on with a family member, or even a teacher or a trusted adult. And so even if we're not directly addressing a human trafficking situation, we're still helping a young person who is experiencing something.
Thank you, Taylor. I think your organization, it's definitely a very helpful resource for many young people.
Thanks.
Dwayne, part of what you do at Cherish Our Children is to create support systems for children of incarcerated parents. How are children impacted when they have an incarcerated parent? And why is it important to be aware of those issues?
That's a very good question. We are school-based services, and so I've had the opportunity to go to some of the schools and have conversations with counselors, principals, but most importantly, some of the students. And I will say that many instances, it's a lot of emotional circumstances and situations that are going on. There is shame, embarrassment, and then equally, there's anger. We just recently had a conference a week ago from an organization, and we had the pleasure of having a panel of experts to come in and talk about this subject matter. And the sheriff, he relayed or conveyed information to us stating that here in Harris County, there are about 90,000 students, HISD students, Harris County students, that are as impacted with a parent or a loved one who is incarcerated. If you dial back a little bit, we specifically serve middle school students. The data suggests that there are about 50,000 students in middle school who are impacted by this situation. And it's just not as simple as a parent goes away, because when a parent goes away, there are very many situations and circumstances that will occur. Sometimes you lose income, and so thereby that resources, food, we start talking about food deficiencies. It has a whole trickle effect on that overall well-being of the student. Student gets to school, perhaps if they can't keep it together, their grades begin to slip. Then also what happens is they feel for some reason that they are part of the blame for the reason why the parent is now incarcerated. Also, this is equally important because per the data provided to us by the Sheriff's Department and by one of the judges who were on the panel as well, increasingly more and more women are becoming incarcerated. So there's a separation there among mom and youth. But then the data also suggests that if resources, proper intervention is not partaken at an earlier stage, the likelihood of those students going on to become entwined within the criminal justice system increases about 70%. So that's a daunting number. Oftentimes our systems, we fail to see students. We have a perception of them, we see them in a certain way. When they come to school, they may be going through something, but their reaction to a question or a situation may further involve them in circumstances at school in regarding discipline. And so I think that more importantly, we work with the wraparound specialists, we work with the counselors, we work with the principals, we work with varying administrations. We have a curriculum-based program that's within the realm of social and emotional learning. And so we go in and facilitate activities, and there's no one-stop fix-it-for-all. The most important aspect or element of what we do is we bestow love. We bestow reciprocated support for the students and the families. And so then likewise, if we learn that along the way there are ancillary support services that are needed by those families, we try to put them in touch with those services via the wraparound services that are provided by schools. I made this comment the other day during a meeting. Someone asked me, Dwayne, well, why is this very or most important? And I said, well, conservatively, it's estimated about 3 million students are impacted by these situations. So I say this to everyone, we all have a role to play in helping and assisting these students who are going through these situations and circumstances.
Dwayne, thank you for your input. This is concerning because 80% of students in the Houston Independent School District come from low-income homes. Fortunately, some Houston area school districts and the City of Houston entities are establishing wraparound programs to provide students with the required resources they need in order to succeed. Dwayne, from what you've seen in your career, what are the best steps to make sure youth can flourish at school and in their home? What resources, school protocols, or policy needs to be available to ensure the safety of youth?
There is not a one-stop fix-it solution that will address everybody's situation or circumstance. But I think that in today's society, in lieu of the many threats, namely school shootings and things like that, I think that the current system of putting resource officers on schools, from my perspective, it only lends to the increased trauma among schools and students that they have to encounter and endure on a daily basis. I think that a more robust safety security protocol should be put in place. I think that I would submit that staffing a personnel with a gun is the most least likely to deter anyone because we can't predict what's going to happen. A more robust system will begin to alleviate that. I'm talking about check-in systems and things like that, where you float your backpacks and all that kind of stuff through. You have a robust check-in system. That is one way that you begin to alleviate potential threats of those situations and circumstances. But then on a more ground level perspective, you mentioned, you stated data a few minutes ago about 80,000 students, or 80% of the students coming from socioeconomically challenging circumstances. I think that all schools should have or be supplied with adequate resources for students to flourish, thrive, and prosper. Regardless of they're poor or not, they should have access, timely access to those resources. Have kids, you don't often look at the kids who may be B or C students, the bottom tier students. I think that once we get to learn with those students, as I said a few minutes ago, I see you, I hear you, and I push you to do the work, right? I get in your corner, I become your advocate. I also think that there should be increased collaborations with community-based organizations.
Thank you, Dwayne. Youth, I believe, are the future. Youth engagement in our city would be extremely useful in creating solutions, ideas, and has the potential to improve community planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwayne and Angel. Taylor, what about you? From experience, what resources and support are needed for youth who are victims of trafficking to help them process and recover from those experiences?
I just want to mirror what you said, Dwayne, because like you said, you captured this perfectly. There's not like a one thing that's going to do it. I often talk about human trafficking situations, and I'll describe them as not just human trafficking situations. Nobody is just trafficked. Like that, there's so many other vulnerabilities and circumstances and risk factors that contribute to their situation being what it is. That's why it's so hard to create like policy around like the human trafficking stuff. That's why data is so weird in the human trafficking world, is just because every situation is so different and there's so many things that are at play. I think when it comes to young people, the idea of wraparound services stands out to me, just kind of trying to tackle from all angles, like what are the needs that this student has and how can we address those needs? Because, so for example, I had a young lady in one of my juvenile justice center programs. She was 14 and she was experiencing withdrawals. She was experiencing grief because her father had just passed away. She was recently incarcerated. She'd been there for like 3 days. She was being bullied at school and she was being pimped out, trafficked. The last one was the thing that she was worried about the least.
I think like these like issues, like I'm glad that you're not taking like surface level approaches to them, because again, every single person's experience, it's like very nuanced and everyone is unique, like, and also everyone's going through their own challenges, and it's much more complicated than just like, oh, problem, we need to find solution, and then that's it. Thank you.
Ewing, part of improving safety and inclusion starts with being inclusive to each other as youth. How can we keep youth from feeling shame or embarrassment from having incarcerated parents?
All throughout my workings in these spaces, and everything from death row, everything from helping ex-prisoners find work, everything from working in a community that was socioeconomically distressed significantly, where I come from, Victoria, Texas. I've always approached it from the standpoint of being able to just connect with people humanely, and respectfully. And so I come from a place of love. When we engage the students, we have a chance to learn a little bit something about them along the way. And so once we begin to engage them, initially, many of the students, they're not going to open up because, one, pride, two, embarrassment and being ashamed, and thirdly, anger, right? But as we consistently beat on that door, say, Mr. Angel, whomever it is, will you please let us in? We want to talk to you. We're not here. We're not coming from a place of harm or want to belittle you or put you in a box, so to speak. We're sincerely here to help. And so once we consistently and always do that, they begin to open up. I said earlier, I've been with the company for a few months, and we're at 7 schools, HISD, Channelview, and Aldine ISD. And one of the schools that we're in is in the Aldine area. It's called Jewel Houston Academy. It's what it's called a turnaround school. They can go either one way or another. They can go in the criminal justice wing, or they can go in, I'm going to aspire for higher education, or that bucket, so to speak. And so what we've done is we learn their talents, we get to know them, but we come from a place where there's nothing wrong with your situation because you had nothing to do with what happened. We don't want you feeling guilty about what someone else did or has done. I'll share a story with you all. When I first came on the job, I was at one of the schools, and we allow the students to tell us how they would like the classroom to be organized. They are empowered. We just facilitate. And so my first encounter, we had two young men just popped up and started running around the room. We're talking about 6th and 7th grade students. I couldn't quite figure that out. And so later it was learned. After I spoke with the counselor, I asked her, I said, well, can you mind sharing these 2 young men's stories? And she went on to say, she said, Dwayne, she says that each of these young men are gifted and talented. One young man, his father recently, about a year, now it's a year and a half ago, murdered someone. So he's gone to prison for a very long time. Another young man's mother is in prison. So all it takes is somebody to say something about his mother, and it triggers about the dad, right? Understandably so. They both scored very high on this national math aptitude test, 6th graders. And so from my standpoint, I don't look at it from the place of your parents are over here, your mom or loved one is in prison. I look at the individual you, and I try to bring you along the way. And so there's nothing to be ashamed of because we all have shortcomings, so to speak. And so if we walk around embarrassed about life, life is going to pass us by. So what we try to do is encourage them to feel loved unconditionally, and we're here to support you.
I agree, Dwayne. Love empowers the unconditional support there is for you. Thank you.
Taylor, in what ways can social media be dangerous for youth, especially since younger generations are more exposed and have access to the internet? And what can we do to help youth navigate the internet more safely?
I'm reminded of some things that came out kind of in the beginning of the COVID, because I kind of shifted the way that I did programming. I mean, it was COVID, you had to. And one of the ways that I would shift the dialogue, especially about like social media, is I would encourage my audience to think about the way that social media had changed in that very short period of time, where we were all spending how much more time on social media? If you're anything like me, it was a lot more time.
A lot more, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, traffickers know that. People that are trying to engage with vulnerable individuals are aware that that was happening. Kind of a misconception about human trafficking is the idea that most people that are trafficked are kidnapped. You know, there's the idea of the white van that pulls up next to your car, and maybe another vehicle like parks really close to your door, so when you try to open it, you can't get in the car, and then they kind of snatch you up. Not to say that doesn't happen, of course that happens, but with human trafficking situations, only about 8 to 9% happen because of a kidnapping. And so, you know, of course, like social media can be dangerous, like if someone has your location, and but I think I focus more on like who are people interacting with on social media, not like are they sharing their location so that somebody's going to kidnap them. I'm thinking like, who are you communicating with? Is your profile on private? Is it on public? If it's on public or private, really, what are you sharing on there? You know, are you letting out your deepest vulnerabilities so that somebody can say, hey, you know, your parents shouldn't treat you like a kid. You know, I see you and I see someone who is mature. You know, let me help you out. Or, you know, wow, I can't believe I just got kicked out of my house. What am I going to do? Someone says, hey, come stay with me for a little bit until you figure it out. right? So like things like that are kind of where I see social media playing a major role.
I like how you brought up like because human trafficking, when the term comes to mind, like you get the impression like, oh, kidnapping, like yeah, you know, but it's also has to do with like youth trusting or like the interactions they have with people that have bad intentions.
Yeah, getting away from the stereotypes and like what you see in
Yeah.
movies is really important because that's just not, that's not what I see on a daily basis. So.
In that way, stereotype, like those kinds of stereotypes can also be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, because you're looking for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You know, if you're walking through like a Walmart and you're paranoid about who's following, like that's not what human trafficking looks like most of the time.
This final question is for both of you. What do you recommend to youth who want to make a difference in their communities but unsure what issues they can advocate for, or how to be a voice in their communities?
And find an issue or issues that you are passionate about. And then don't just off the cuff say that we need to fix potholes in the street of Houston. Do some research. Assemble a team of people. There is power in numbers. And be willing to allow yourself to be vulnerable. When I say vulnerable, because what you propose or what you espouse, it may not be in alignment with the mainstream thought or ideologies, so to speak. And then you try to find common ground, common thread amongst those persons you are working with in the varying spaces that you're going to be working in. In my youth, my dad was in politics, and I felt that some of the things that they were doing were very antiquated. The ideologies were old or revisionist. All they were doing was regurgitating, old ideas that had been rehashed from the past. And so a group of us, we came together. We actually convened some city council persons in my hometown, and we presented and provided viable or alternative solutions to the situations that we were dealing with. I think that when you do it from that standpoint, again, it may not pass in those moments, but remain passionate about it long enough to write about it, talk about it, podcast about it, social media about it, tell the stories. You have a very powerful voice, the youth do. But we fail to realize that because sometimes we try to take on that task by ourselves. I think there is very much strength in numbers. I think in the collective, once you begin arguing or making the cases for what you're pleading to change, I think it will come to fruition. And that's always been my approach, and that's been my encouragement for those who are trying to change systems, so to speak.
I could list a few things. One, find an organization that you feel passionate about the work that they're doing and just give your time. Time is the most valuable thing that you can give to another person. Consider that tenfold if you're giving your time to an organization. Consider it 100-fold if you're giving it to an organization that serves people that are either in vulnerable or compromised positions. Bring an organization that educates people about human trafficking to your school or to your church or whatever kind of community that you're a part of. Bring people in to talk about these kind of things. So I've been doing human trafficking education programs for more than 4 years. Every time I do one, I hear, oh, I didn't know that human trafficking wasn't vans and kidnapping and people getting shipped to other countries. Like every time. I'll say two more. One, share information that you learn. If you kind of like what Mr. Duane said, you got to learn about some stuff. You got to find what speaks to you, what you want to fight against, and learn about how to do that. But then that information is not going to do any good if it just sits in your head. And then the other thing is if you see that exploitation and gender-based violence is a major issue, and a classmate says a joke about someone in prostitution, right? Hey, that's not cool. You don't know what that person's experiencing. You don't know what they're going through. Don't joke about that. Someone could make a joke about someone's parent who's incarcerated, and that might trigger them, and then there's a whole sort of consequence for like what happens to that particular person. So you just being the kind of human that says, hey, like maybe we shouldn't talk to our colleagues that way. Just being the kind of person that steps in when you see injustice, being a good ally can really help people when they're in troubling times.
Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed both of what you had to share, and I think both of your experiences and you coming here today have been very insightful. I think we can definitely be more educated on ways to create safe and inclusive communities for all children. Thank you.
It was my honor and pleasure. I thank you all, and thank you for your leadership, and keep on doing what you're doing. Be advocates, voicing advocates for varying causes. So I hold your efforts in very, very high esteem. God bless each of you and every endeavor that you pursue.
Yeah, thanks so much for letting me be a part of this. It's beautiful to see you guys in the position that you are, so just thank you for everything that you're doing.
We also want to thank our listeners for tuning in with us to learn more about how we can ensure all children are protected from harm and make our communities safer so young people can flourish. We hope that you all enjoy learning more about the importance of children's rights and have been inspired to advocate for children's rights yourself. How will you make a difference? Also, special thanks to the City of Houston's Mayor's Office of Education and Youth Engagement and the Houston Community Action Council for their support in the production of this podcast.
In our next episode, we will discuss the importance of youth voice and the right of children to be involved in the decision-making of their communities, with two special guests, Alex Xavier Mendoza, who serves on the Mayor's Youth Council, and the UNICEF USA National Youth Council, and Tommy Wayne, who is a legislative aide in the Texas House of Representatives and an intern at the Houston City Council. Tune in to our next episode to hear about their experiences and their importance of amplifying youth voices.
Man, I'm excited for that one. We hope to see you there.
See you next time. Bye.